Hello and welcome to the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything fantasy and science fiction. Your host is Matt Crosswhite, and the subject matter expert is Josiah Marshall. And here we go.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast. I am Matt Crosswhite, your host, joined by subject matter expert Josiah Marshall. How are you, sir?
Doing well, sir. And how are you today?
I'm doing well, sir, as well, sir.
Good.
I'm excited for today's topic because we're talking radio dramas again, yes?
Yes. We're talking radio dramas again. I'm excited about this. This is, next to books, this is definitely my second favorite most form of entertainment out there, even more than television. Oh man, yeah, I grew up on this stuff. So,
absolutely.
It's definitely one of my funner ones. Oh yeah. So I'm excited to do this one because it's gonna be a little interesting. Because the idea of science fiction has always baffled me in a way because it never really seemed natural with all of the electronics and doodads, because I didn't grow up in an electronic home. For crying out loud, when I was even a kid, I think I mentioned this one time before, I grew up with a record player. That was my form of entertainment anytime and every time, except for books. It was a record player. So I'd sit there listening to albums, and I even had one of those even smaller ones for the 8-inch, and little booklets that go along with it where it read you the story. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed those a lot. And if I was to say some names right now, some of our Christian listeners would probably be able to pick up those names from the 80s and 90s and even the 70s, 80s, and 90s of these Christian radio dramas that came about, which I would argue this will definitely be for another episode, but I would argue that the Christian community here in the United States revived the radio drama interest in a big way, especially for the Christian community back in those days. Because even one of the names I'm going to mention today actually has its beginnings among the evangelical community. So, yeah.
Okay, is that the one we're jumping in with?
Yeah. I think that's
we can start somewhere else if you want to.
No. I've been trying to put this together in my head of going, okay, which one's going to be number one? Which one's going to be number two? Which one's going to be number three? And it's kind of hard for me to do that because I have to admit, these are all really good. But if I was to do number three, with a bit of a sure, it would be Myst. Now, some of our listeners may cock their heads to the side at the name because it may sound familiar for some of our 1990s video gamers, because Myst was originally a video game that was developed by the Miller brothers, Robyn and Rand. And it was actually it was put out by Macintosh back in the day. Boy, that's the name I haven't heard in a very long time.
Right.
But this one's going to fall into an interesting category because the reason I'm dubbing it science fiction, because it could almost straddle the line, which really even one other one I'm going to mention today could do the exact same thing. It could straddle the line. Myst takes place on an island, and it involves a young man who doesn't really know much about himself. He grows up in the desert with this older woman, and he eventually goes off into the world for self-discovery. So it's got the quintessential template for coming to age story. But when you get into it, oh, the complexities of it. Oh, good stinking grief. Now, there are ways that this civilization, which depending on how you approach it, can be kind of disorienting, because you've got different time frames that some of the stuff happens with. But essentially, he goes off, he finds people, especially his people that he's been looking for, and he finds out that they have this ability to be able to read themselves into another world. And it's not just reading themselves there for the sake of, oh, let's go and experience a story. No, actually going into the world and creating these portals going back and forth between these worlds. And you do different things in these different worlds, putting together a colony, or kind of doing some construction. It's almost got that Minecraft idea with maybe a little bit of Age of Empires sort of thing. There's Age of Empires. There's you an another old name you haven't heard probably.
Oldie and goodie. Yep.
Yep. So, it's interesting that the game was such a big deal that it was actually called one of the best video games ever made, because it sold over 6 million copies. 6 million. And I mean, it's really something else, just the game itself. But I'm wanting to specifically talk about the adaptation that they did for audio. Now, it's not what I would call a typical a typical radio dramatization. It is technically what's known as a full cast reading.
Okay.
Now, we can split hairs over this if we want to, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in this category because the way they designed this thing was truly well done, because they definitely put together some decent some background music for it. They've got multicast oh good grief, actors. I'll get there. Multicast actors, and the sound effects are there. So overall, it has everything that you would expect out of a radio dramatization. And it even had some decent actors involved. One of them was David Ogden Stiers. Do you know that name?
I can't say that I do. David
Charles
Ogden.
Emerson Winchester III.
There it is. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Yep. Charles Emerson. He actually did two of the voices, and especially in the video game he did it in. But if I recall correctly, he was also in the full cast reading. He let's see. I'm trying to recall what let's see. He did Urshu. Let's see. No, is it that? You know, I can't recall the characters off the top of my head of what he did, but
That's okay.
the fact that he was involved is still a lot of fun. But there are novels to this. They actually did do a spin-off novel, but the books that they did were considered abridged because the novels and the video games were considered more of a full-length story. So as a result, the audio book was considered to be an abridged. So it's a shortened version of the story. But it's definitely my third. I'm going to definitely put it in my third. It's definitely fun. It's entertaining. It is lengthy. You really have to have the ability to be able to sit back and focus on it, because there is a great deal of complexity to it. And so with him jumping between worlds, you really have to focus in order to keep that straight.
That makes
But
sense.
when you do have the time to be able to just kind of sit back, close your eyes, and just listen, you're able to really jump into a place and a world that has a lot of history, has a lot of rich history, civilization. You get some characters. He actually has a love interest. And of course, he's got the bad guys chasing after him, trying to close things down on him. But overall, I would definitely recommend it. And it is put out by Penguin. And the neat part about this one is that it's old enough to where you can get a copy of it off of archive.org. So you can get it for free. Yeah.
Very cool.
I actually have it on the original cassette.
No way.
Yeah, I do. I have it on the original cassette. And they did all three books. All three books they did. And so you can get all three as a full cast reading. But yeah, it's all on archive.org. So you can go download them and get them for free.
How fun.
Yep.
Very good.
Yep. So that would be my number 3.
Okay. Which brings us to number 2.
Star Wars.
Um,
The other one that can straddle those genres. Because in my opinion, it definitely has more of a fantasy story built into a science fiction world. You've got wizards. You've got wizards and you've got all these different creatures and the roles that they play. It's arguably a fantasy story set in space opera. And I said it. I said it. You can get mad at me if you want, but I have to use George Lucas to prove the point that even he called it a space opera. So don't get mad at me.
Why would people get mad? It genuinely is a space opera.
It is.
Is that even in debate?
Even I don't know if it's in debate as much as it used to be, but it used to be a very big debate because to say that was to dumb it down to no more than a soap opera, which in my opinion, it is a soap opera. Because it's melodramatic. Let's just admit this here. It is heavily melodramatic. And even George Lucas's approach to it was, I wouldn't quite call it slapstick, but it was definitely more humorous than some of the fans have even wanted it to be.
Sure.
We're not going to go into that today. We are definitely going to have our moment talking about the Star Wars compendium, but
Yes.
we're going to focus on the radio drama. Did you know there was a radio drama for Star Wars?
I know that there are books and audiobooks, so it makes sense that there would be radio dramas, but no, I was not actually aware of it.
Okay. Well, there is. It was technically a radio series. And it was put out by none other than our own National Public Radio as part of the NPR
Really?
Playhouse. Yep. And there was technically there's a couple of different arguments to say that there were the first two and then the third one was produced differently, but it's really the same team. So the first one came out in 1981, then Empire Strikes Back came out in 83, and then Return of the Jedi came out in 1996.
So it's the original 3, not like a spin-off series or extra stories.
No,
Interesting.
it is the original 3. And they even got some of the original actors to play in the radio drama. They got Mark Hamill to come back and do Luke Skywalker. They had Anthony Daniels, C-3PO. They even had Billy D. Williams come back. Oh my word! His name just escaped me. The guy that runs the place in the clouds, in the second one. Was that the second one? Oh, good grief! Lando
I'd
Calrissian.
love to help you, but okay.
Lando
Okay.
Calrissian.
The place
But
names.
there is one thing, one person that came and did a voice for the radio dramatization that was not actually in the movies.
Okay.
Anyone familiar with Cliffhanger, Third Rock from the Sun? Just let me give those two. Have you ever seen Cliffhanger before?
I've not, but I've seen a few episodes of Third Rock.
Okay. John Lithgow does the voice of Yoda.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
This guy is incredibly versatile. So if you've seen Cliffhanger, if you've seen Planet of the Apes, if you've seen, that is the more recent Planet of the Apes, if you've seen
Sure.
Third Rock from the Sun, you know that John Lithgow is one of these actors that has such a wide range of versatility that when he gets onto the screen, he commands attention, and he does it extremely, extremely well. And when he does Yoda, he does it with precision, and he does it with respect. What was that? Frank Oz, I believe, is the one that did the ones in the movies. And he even said, I wasn't trying to come in and do something different. I wanted to honor what Frank Oz did. So he did it.
Very nice.
Which is really rather cool. But these for a while there, you could not find these very easily in on say even eBay. And
Really?
I actually, when during my bookstore years, it was very difficult to find the CDs for anywhere less than $70. And there were, let's see, I can't remember exactly how many CDs there were, but it was a 13-part for the original Star Wars episode that was done in the 80s. And it was 13? Yeah, 13 part with almost 6 hours long.
Wow.
Almost 6 hours long. And it wasn't anything to shake a stick at. They really covered the basics to the point where even Lucas said, there's some holes we need to fill.
In the movies?
Yep. So for the radio drama, he actually wrote some additional material to fill in those holes.
Wow.
Isn't that cool? Especially, I can't remember the guy's name, but one of Luke's best friends, you had him meeting him when he finally joins the Rebels. Well, there's actually a scene that he wrote in for them interacting when he comes back to Tatooine to see all the guys. There's also a racing scene on Tatooine among Luke and some of his friends, and them talking about doing this special race through what was it, Needle of something, I can't quite recall off the top of my head. But yeah, not only did he come and write some additional scenes that filled in what he called some narrative gaps, they even got what's his bucket, the music guy, John Williams.
Oh, yes.
He came back and even wrote some additional music.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Okay. So any Star Wars fans who are listening to this and are unaware of the radio dramatization or the full cast reading, you have some homework to do because there's stuff you might be missing.
Yep.
That is fantastic.
And it really is a lot of fun, and it covers a lot of different elements from the Star Wars universe that you wouldn't otherwise know. And I'm not going to go into details on that, but anyways, you've got the 1981 that was the original Star Wars that was 13 parts, so that's 6 hours long. Now, the second one, Empire Strikes Back, was a 10-parter, and it wasn't as long. It was about 4.5 hours. And it was put out in 1983. And it had the exact same actors for the most part. There were a few extras, such as John Lithgow Yoda was not in the first story, so this is where John Lithgow comes into play. And Mark Hamill comes back. This is when Billy D. Williams comes into play as well. And then you've got other big names such as Peter Friedman, Perry King, and let's see, Alan Rosenberg, who did Boba Fett. So there are some reasonably there's some names in here that some people might even recognize, such as Sam McCurry and David Alan Grier. These are actors as well as voiceover workers. And then you get the third one, Return of the Jedi. Now, the reason it was such a big wait, because you had these first two come out in the 80s, and then this one comes out in 1996, right? So the reason for that was because the federal funding was put on hold for the NPR, and it dramatically reduced that funding. And so the plans for that just simply fell apart, not only because of that, but even though it was believed to be financial, but there was also a disagreement between Lucasfilms and the company in Los Angeles that was trying to put this together, the production company KUSC. And so there's definitely the financial part. There's also reason to believe there was a disagreement between these two companies. But when they were eventually able to come together, they were able to produce a little over 3 hour production in a 6-part adaptation of The Return of the Jedi. And they also have some new scenes in here, which one was Luke Skywalker building a new lightsaber on Tatooine, which was actually based on a deleted scene from the movie. That was technically in the movie, but because they didn't put it in the movie, he put it into this. There's also a scripted scene between C-3PO and Boba Fett in Jabba the Hutt's palace. And he didn't, Anthony Daniels, the actor, he actually did not want that in the movie because he felt like the droid shouldn't be on friendly terms with a bounty hunter, but they ended up putting it in with the radio drama.
Interesting.
And then Brian Daley is the guy that he was the adapter who brought all of this to play for the radio productions. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? I'm actually confusing myself here. Yeah, no, Anthony Daniels was upset that yeah. So it was originally going to be a scene between him and Boba Fett, but instead Anthony said, yeah, I don't want him, he shouldn't be on friendly terms with the bounty hunter. So they replaced Boba with the dancer Arika. And they actually borrowed that from one of the Timothy Zahn's books. I think it was either a book or a short story. And so they actually, I got myself mixed up there. So yeah, there is a scene where C-3PO is talking with Arika, which is one of the dancers in Jabba the Hutt's palace. So definitely some interesting differences between the radio drama and the movies. Now, one of the more interesting and more sad facts related to this was that Brian Daley, died just a few hours after the recording was concluded. And so there was additional material that was put in by John Whitman, but that series was actually dedicated to Brian Daley for all that he contributed. But now the cast on this one, there's one that was really just kind of made me laugh a little bit. For some of our older folks, they might remember that back in the 70s and the early 80s, there was a very popular television show called The Mary Tyler Moore Show. And in it, there was an actor a character that actually got a spinoff series from that show. And the character's name was Lou Grant. Well, the actor's name is Edward Asner, or otherwise known as Eddie Asner. Well, he came in and voiced Jabba the Hutt for Return of the Jedi.
How cool is that?
Yeah, so there's an interesting connection. And of course, Anthony Daniels came back and played C-3PO. However, Billy D. Williams, he wasn't available, and also Mark Hamill was not available. So in the third one, you've got Joshua Farden playing Luke Skywalker and R.E. Gross playing Lando Calrissian. Which you might recognize R.E. He was most notably on the ABC sitcom Ellen. So there's that, but John Lithgow does come back and do Yoda. So there's very definitely cool. some good names, some very well-known names that are still attached to this, but there were some really fun, if you can find them out there. I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, some of them were on YouTube, but there were some really interesting radio promos and even some deleted scenes from the productions that you can find on YouTube. At least I used to be able to find them on there. So there was some promos that were done by Anthony Daniels and Mark Hamill, but there was some alternate scenes or deleted scenes that from the original one and also from the third one that you can probably find on YouTube still. But there's also one that's called The Making of Star Wars. So there was kind of an interview of how they did it for the radio series. So those can be some fun things to do. But even the wilder one was there was actual trading cards that was spun off the radio show and actually illustrated some of the scenes from the first radio Star Wars radio drama that was done by Topps. So the popular sports card company Topps, they put out some trading cards of it back in 2013. I don't know if they're cool. How valuable they are, but you know what? Who knows? They might have some value to them. But those are that was one interesting thing that was just so kind of wild to me. Going, really? I never would have thought that. But hey, you know what? To each his own. And I think it's a fun way to be able to even memorialize a radio drama series that has been of a story that's been so captivating and integrated into people's lives these days. I mean, who doesn't know the line, "But Luke, I am your father."
Right. Absolutely.
So yeah, very so that cool. that would be my number 2.
Excellent. Which brings us, drum roll, to number 1.
To number 1. Now, when it comes to number 1, I've listened to this, probably 4, maybe as much as 5 times. And it's one that has not disappointed because it is a story by a classic author, Robert A. Heinlein. I actually like the background to the story of this because Robert Heinlein was an interesting guy. He was actually an aviator engineer in World War II. And so he fought in World War II. And then after World War II, he went into writing. Now, a lot of writers after World War II contribute their inspiration to what's known as ASEs. Now, I've mentioned this before, but I want to bring it up again because I think it's incredibly important to know the heritage of this, because World War II was known as the War of the Book. Books were being destroyed en masse by the Nazi Party. There were piles of them. And Bibles included. Bibles were being torched, mostly because back in those days, Bibles had genealogies in the front of them. They were known as family Bibles. And so some of these Bibles were Jewish. And so, yeah, they weren't going to let those survive, so they torched them. And as a result, you had this interesting event that took place in the United States by librarians. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but suffice it to say, these librarians realized that if they're going to help their boys in arms that are fighting in the trenches, and gold bricking is what they called it, but they're experiencing PTSD is what we know it to be today. What's going to help them with the battle of their minds? Putting their minds somewhere else. Let's get books into these guys' hands. And so through a series of events, they eventually conclude that they need something that can fit in their pockets. And so thus became the Armed Services Edition, which is it's more rectangular. And it is, the way they did it, they really compacted these things in a clever way. It's a columned printing, both sides of a page. These pages are super, super thin, and they're only held together by staples.
Oh my goodness.
Staples. Yep. And but they were designed to fit into a GI's pocket. And so these GIs, they are reading these books and they are falling to pieces. I remember my grandfather, my mother's dad, he pulled one out one time and it just was the nub. It was the spine of it. It was all that was left because he had worn it out so much that the pages just ripped and fell out. And so it was something else to be able to sit there and even listen to my grandfather talk about World War II. But Robert Heinlein has brought in what I would say is a more mature adult science fiction. When it's not just, it's got something of a coming to age story, but when you look at his story Between Planets, it can have an element where it would be considered an adult, more mature story, because it's dealing with things that were definitely prominent during World War II, and after. What was that? The 1950s, the communist list, the red list. You didn't want to end up on that, or else you wouldn't get work, especially in Hollywood. You'd get canned easily enough. But pardon me. But so he tackles some of this in his story. So you've got this young boy. The story starts out with this young boy in New Mexico in a future, it could either be future or it could even be argued to be an alternate universe. And he's at this school, and he eventually finds out that he's gonna have to leave because he's a Martian now, but he's a human colonist from Mars. And so there's this growing animosity between Mars and Earth, and even Mars and the Venusians. And so there's this complexity going on here with political interplay that ends up creating this war. And so as a result, he finds himself ostracized by his classmates at school. And so he's actually kicked out. Even the principal said, if you weren't going to leave, then I would probably have to have kicked you out, just for your own, as he would have argued, for his own safety.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's how you keep somebody out. Or
right.
That's how you keep somebody safe.
Right. But he does get out. But of course, you've got to have a reason for somebody to be chasing him. And his parents send him something. And so as a result, that sets some guys on his heels to try to get this item from him. I'm not going to tell what it is because I want people to listen to this one. It was a phenomenal job. And I can't necessarily remember any of the names off the top of my head of the actors, because this is just one where I got completely lost in the story. But it wasn't that I recall any big names that were involved. Excuse me.
Okay.
But just the story itself created some interesting moments where you not only had questions of war coming up, but you also had, beg pardon, But you also had questions of identity coming into play and loyalties, to say the least.
Sure.
He ends up getting stranded on Venus, and he, uh, he gets some. What I liked about Robert was that he really was simple in his presentation of story, and so in just very simple ways, you start developing affections for some of these characters. And one in particular for me was the operator of a restaurant that he has on Venusian, because that's where he was originally. So I should clarify. I'm going to clarify this. The boy was originally going to Mars, but because Mars went dark and the war was just starting, the transport ship was redirected to Venus, where he was stranded for most of the war. So he wasn't able to get there. But this restaurant guy took him in, and he ended up working with him. And I just really enjoyed that part of it. But there are some aliens involved. And you get kind of, I wouldn't quite call it anthropomorphization, but they're more of a stand-in. He even meets one of these aliens on the transport ship, and it is a Venusian Syrian or dragon. And it's a dragon that calls himself Sir Isaac Newton in English, because his alien...
Goodness.
Yeah, his alien name was unpronounceable by humans, so they took on English names so that people could actually
How funny
call
is
them
that?
something. Yeah, yeah. So, and even the voices they gave to the Venusians carried with it some more Cockney flavored dialects. So you get this very English air to the aliens, and some of the neat things. They're big. They're incredible scientists. They have the ability to travel between planets and operate technologies, but they also are hatched out of eggs. So they often, I remember them referring to a few times the Great Egg, especially for Sir Isaac Newton, because he could trace his ancestry all the way back to the Great Egg. So that was supposed to be a big deal. But
That is so funny.
oh, it is funny. But you know what? All in all, it's a great fun story with one. I would call it one basic. It has one basic principle at play in the story, and that is pay it forward. It was one of the bigger philosophies that I've seen, especially in Robert Heinlein's storytelling, where he really wanted it to feel like that there was a true idea to steady someone's judgment, and sustain a free society in which to flourish. Because if you're not thinking of others, then, and you're not passing on what something has been given to you, then it's just going to create a stagnation. And so that was a very big key philosophy in this one. And of course you see that in a lot of other stories, but really still, I thought it really complemented the story very, very, very well. And it allowed the logic and the progression of the story to continue on to where it ended up. And so that would be my number one. That would be
Excellent.
my
And that's
number
a really
one.
good lesson for us to have these days as well. We need to keep that in mind.
Yep.
Well, listeners,
So,
thank you for tuning in with us. So you now have quite a lot of homework to do. You have several radio dramas to go and find and listen to. And until next time, thank you for tuning in with us. We've noticed the number of listeners has been increasing. We appreciate you listening and sharing this podcast with your friends and family. And until next time, keep listening and keep reading.